Hello everybody, coming in today for our video for this week. However, I understand that if things come up, not everyone's going to see this at exactly the right moment, so see it whenever you can. Anyway, in today's video, I wanted to hit a topic that I kind of half did earlier on in the spring. I didn't really cover the aftermath of what happened, and that was earlier in the year we did hit the 1929 stock market crash that led to the Great Depression. However, I did not actually discuss the Great Depression in general, and given that it was such a crucial time in American history and across the world due to the financial hardship that many millions suffered, and due to the factor also in kind of related terms that as of right now, although we're not on the scale of the Great Depression, we are going through an economic slump, I thought it might be somewhat relevant to possibly do it now. So, without further ado, I wanted to just go ahead and get this topic hit, as it is a vital one in American history at least, and to the world as well. But we're going to focus mainly on the impact of it here in the United States. So, for that purpose, I'm not exactly going to focus really on the world stage, but keep in mind that the Great Depression did impact almost everyone across the globe. So, let's jump into it here, and we will have a small review here of what happened prior to the Great Depression, as I did cover the 1929 stock market crash that caused this, and I will provide the little link at the end of this video to that video that I had done. In case you have not seen that, you feel free to click on that link and view it. That way you can get a good inclination of what happened and what kind of started this whole mess. So, what happens is, in a review here, the 1920s, the U.S. economy undergoes a massive boom. And this is partly due to the end of World War I, which ended in 1918. The peace treaty is signed in 1919 at Versailles. And the world is at peace, and there's a post-war economic boom, not just in the United States, but across the entire world mostly. Unless you're one of the unfortunate people to be alive in Germany. Wasn't that good? And we discussed that in another video a little bit, how after the Second World War, well, not Second World War, the First World War, Germany really didn't recover its economy. It really struggled to make ends meet because not only had it formed a new government, but it also had to contend with massive reparations payments that were being demanded by the Allies. So Germany aside, most of the world was going through an economic boom. This came to such fruition, such prosperity during the 1920s that in the United States at least, the 1920s became known as the Roaring Twenties. And they came to kind of symbolize a massive success of the American economy. There was plentiful jobs, there was plentiful money in people's accounts, that everyone could go and do what they wanted. And one of the biggest things that people did was not just spend lavishly, but they did a major thing, and that was there was a massive amount of investing that was going on the Wall Street Stock Exchange, also known simply as the stock market. There was a lot of investing, and in case you don't know what investing is, to some of you that may not know what the stock market is, basically it's just betting on whether or not a stock or a share of a company is going to go up or down, and depending on how it goes, you can make money off that. Usually you want the price to go up. I do not get involved with the stock market, but I know people that do. Although my opinion of it differs from many, so I'm not going to list that today. I don't know if I'll ever list that, but I got some very personal opinions about how good or how bad the stock market is, and the only thing I'll say here is I don't trust it entirely, and the Great Depression is part of the reason why. So what happens is there's a lot of stock market trading during the 1920s, during this age of prosperity for the American economy. And this, in turn, is what's going to kind of lead to the Great Depression. And when I say everyone invested, I mean almost everyone. You had common citizens, you had school teachers, janitors, bankers, businessmen. Almost anyone you could think of usually had at least a share or two on the stock market that they were investing in. And you also had businesses investing into the stock market, you had financiers, and you even had some banks were even investing a little bit of their own cash into the stock market as well. And they were constantly betting, as we state, on the price of these shares. But they made one fatal error. When you do the stock market, you got to realize, and I think anybody can say this, whether or not you actually play on it or not, and you will doodle around with it, stock prices do not continuously increase. There are times where they will fall. They will go down. They're not going to continuously go up forever and infinity. They will come down at points, especially like right now, the economic hardship the country's going through. They're going up and they're going down every day. Well, people back then didn't quite understand this concept, and when they were betting on these stock shares, they were constantly betting that the prices were going to continue to go up. They would not go down. Nothing bad was going to happen. They would continue to go up and up and up and up, and more money they would profit from. They didn't quite get that it wasn't going to end up being that way. That's just not the way economy works, or the stock market in general. So what happens is you get this very long period in the 1920s where people are continuously betting on the stock market, and at the same time, some of these stocks are slowly starting to depreciate in value. They're slowly going down, but the prices on the stock market aren't reflecting this, and they just keep going up. So many people start buying or owning stocks that are not worth the full price that they think they're worth much more than they actually are. Basically, to put it simply, people think that the stocks they have are worth more than their actual value. They don't realize that their actual value is a lot less than what they think it is. And what eventually happens is at some point this bubble is going to burst. And that happens in 1929 in October. In October 1929, the stock prices not only begin to decline, they start taking more of a sharp downturn, finally, because the bubble's gotten big enough, it's no longer going to support itself. And this is where everything's going to start going downhill. Investors, as soon as these stock prices start going down, a lot of investors, they start frantically trying to sell all their shares. They're starting to fear that they're going to lose money because they're going down, because the shares are no longer worth the price that they bought them for. The whole ideal is to sell them at a higher price than what you bought them for. That's the whole basic ideal. You buy a stock or a share, then you sell it again, but you sell it when the price is higher. If it's lower than when you bought it and then you sell it, you've lost money because you've not made as much money as you did when you bought the thing. Investors basically, due to this, they frantically begin to sell all of their assets, all of their shares, all their holdings that they have. And this starts a massive panic. And on October 29th, 1929, on what becomes known as Black Tuesday, the stock market completely collapses. It just gets wiped out in one day, where over 16 million shares get sold in one day. Actually, I think it's somewhere between 12 and 16 million. 12 and 16 million, somewhere within that range. But still, that's a massive amount of shares for one day. And it causes the stock market just to go, yeah, I can't support this anymore. And just to give you a hint here of how much stocks were being sold, and it increased throughout the 1920s. We have 3 years here. In 1929, for the year, there were 173 million stock shares sold on the stock market. In 1926, you had 451 million were sold. And in 1929, the year of the Depression hitting, I don't know how that isn't. You might as well say about 1 billion stocks were sold. The stock market, it's crashed. The stock market's done. And the prices had crashed due to, of course, many were not knowing that these stocks that they thought they had a bunch of money in, they're worth a lot less than they actually are. This was caused, and also didn't help, that there were low wages in the 20s for people working. There was consumer debt that was on the rise. You had rising unemployment that was starting to occur. Food prices were falling. There was an excess of large bank loans as banks keep loaning out money willy-nilly. You get all these little factors, and they just condense in this hard, big old ball, and eventually that ball is shot at that bubble. So this is what causes the Great Depression. The stock market crashes, and so many people had invested money in the stock market, and now they've lost almost all that money by trading off. And seriously, some people lost their entire life savings. I'm not kidding you. Some people had nothing in the bank when this happened. They had lost that much, and some people, it was such a distraught moment for them that they actually committed suicide because they didn't see no way out of the hole they had dug themselves. Now, and this didn't just happen to people. This was happening to businesses. It happened to banks. It happened to almost anybody that had had any share of stock on the stock market. This, immediately following the stock market crash, consumer confidence starts falling immensely, and this causes further problems. Factories and businesses now have to start slowing their production. They have to start firing workers because there's not as much demand for their products. Thus, they don't need as many products, and thus, they don't need as many workers to make so many products. So people are now starting to lose their jobs. Production is slowing down because there's not demand, because people are not confident in going out and buying stuff anymore, because either they don't have the money to do so, or they're afraid to spend it because they don't know if they're going to have much left before too long. Now, those that are lucky enough to not get fired and actually keep their jobs in these businesses and factories, they often experience wage cuts, and they also experience decreased buying power. The value of the dollar bill goes down. And employers, who probably likely had investments on the stock market, they lost money too. They can't afford to pay their employees as much as they were, so they have to lower how much they're paying them. This caused almost every American who had paid with credit in some form during the 1920s, they're now in debt, massively. And on top of this, foreclosures and repossessions begin to occur from the banks who have run out of money themselves. And this soon, due to these sliding economic factors, it soon spreads worldwide due to the factor that the world was kind of connected through the fixed currency exchange. So what started in the US comes to Europe next, then it goes to Asia. It's one domino after another. The big panic comes in about 1930, a year after the stock market crash, and this involves the banks. That financial institution where you can place your money and go to the bank, withdraw money when you need it, make a deposit, make a withdrawal, go get a loan. If you're buying a house, buying a car, banks started having a tough time, and we're going to discuss why. Many banks, as we mentioned, not only had money that they put into the stock market that they had invested, but many of them had, just as they do now, they loaned money. And they were loaning money to people and businesses prior to the crash. And some of these loans were pretty big. And they took a massive risk by giving people these massive loans with the assurance from the people or the business that will pay you back, which is what you're supposed to do now. Well, stock market crash hits. These people and businesses lose almost everything. They don't have the money to make the loan repayments. The bank's not getting paid back, which you might just say, oh, the bank's just angry because they didn't get its money back. Well, that's the bank's money they lent. They spent that money. Now they can't return and repay the bank for lending them that money. So the bank no longer has money. It's not getting money from the people it loaned it to, so now the bank's running out of money. And due to this starts hitting the banks pretty hard. The banks start running out of cash. They start running out of money in their institutions. And many start to panic because they go to the bank and they ask for a withdrawal. Well, the bank tells them, well, we can't give you, $200 because we don't have $200. We can't give you it because we don't have it. And many people start panicking because they start realizing the banks do not have the money in order to give us the money when we want to. Our account can say we have this much in the bank, but in reality, we don't have nothing because the bank can't even give us the dollar bill that represents that amount. So many people start panicking and they start rushing to the banks in what becomes known as bank runs. And with a bank run, every day there's people that go to the bank, they make withdrawals, they make deposits. Well, this is where you get almost everyone in one town going to the bank on one day. And everyone, instead of depositing money, they're all asking for it to be withdrawn, and they want cash. They want their entire savings accounts withdrawn from the bank because they have lost confidence that the bank has any ability to keep their money safe. And unfortunately, the banks can't handle this. This starts devastating the banks further because now they're running out of money even quicker because people are withdrawing it all. Any bit of money they actually have left, the people are now taking out. Thousands across the nation now take part in these bank runs, and this starts the banks losing so much money, eventually to the point that many of the banks start actually shutting down and closing. They can't operate anymore. They have no money. They're bankrupt. The banks are bankrupt. To make matters even worse for the farmers, they can no longer afford to hire employees to harvest their crops. Thus, their big fall autumn harvests, like corn, beans, everything else, rice, whatever you want to call, you can't harvest them on your own. You can't afford to pay people to harvest it for you because you have no money to pay them with. Many of them, and these harvest crops are what usually feeds their families for the next year. The farmers are forced to leave their crops in the field while they rot and just decay. They can't even harvest their crops. They can't make money. And to make matters worse, in the southern Great Plains, the Dust Bowl begins. I'm sure you've all heard of that. The big drought during the Great Plains that coughed up the big old dust storms. That begins in the early 1930s. And that devastates the farmland. It causes people to die, causes them to lose their livestock, causes them to lose their crops if they hadn't already. It was just a massive amount of economic downturn that just one domino after another. And as I mentioned with the banks here, you get customers, they start demanding cash deposits. Well, in return, the bank is forced to liquidate loans in order to supplement. In an effort to try to sustain itself, it has to liquidate the loans. It has to demand the immediate repayment of the entire loan at once, of the people that it loaned the money to. It can no longer be made in so many dollars a month. It has to be, oh, we need all our money now. Well, we don't have your money now. Okay, so we're going to have to, I guess we're going to take possession of your house and we're going to have to auction it off. You see where this goes? Thousands of banks closed their doors by 1933. The country is losing its banks, it's lost its money, it's just going downhill. Investors even start withdrawing their foreign loans because out of fear of the financial hardship that's rapidly spreading globally, and this causes the price of traded goods to also increase. In 1930, President Herbert Hoover, who was the president of the United States at this time, he was the former Secretary of Commerce under Warren G. Harding and Calvin Coolidge. Hoover implements the Smoot-Hawley tariff, and this places a 42 to 50% tax on any import from any nation that's selling goods in the United States. Well, this is an effort to try to boost American products being cheaper, and then people, if they're wanting to go out to the store, they're going to buy something that's American made and put money in Americans' pockets. Well, in response, other nations respond in kind with similar high tariffs, which causes farmers in particular, who at the same time as they're selling their crops here at home, they're trying to sell them abroad. They can no longer sell their crops because no one in Europe will buy them because they cost too much after the tariffs put on them. Many unemployed start going homeless. They lose their houses. The banks having to retake their possession of their homes and their property, and they start living in these little shanty little towns that are real poor, and these come to be called Hoovervilles after President Herbert Hoover, who is starting to get a very bad rap because he's literally just kind of sitting there and doing nothing. And we're going to discuss why here in a second. There's so many unemployed that you have bread and soup kitchens start being formed across the country, and it just, anything that you can picture with poor and destitute starts happening here. In 1930, you had 4 million unemployed. 1931, that has gone up to 6 million unemployed. President Hoover's administration, Hoover was elected in 1929. He took office in March 1929. The stock market crash happens in October. Hoover did not plan for his presidency to have to deal with the Great Depression. He planned to have to deal with the same economic prosperity that had been happening with his two predecessors. So when this happens, it catches him off guard. And Hoover, he's a Republican and he's a former Secretary of Commerce. He doesn't believe that it's his responsibility nor the government's responsibility to intervene in the economy. He doesn't believe they have a right or responsibility to do so. And because of this, he basically does nothing. He does nothing to help with the Depression. Hoover sits there in his chair, says that the Depression will solve itself out. We have no way that we can really lawfully do this, so it's just going to have to sort itself out. We'll be over it before too long. While Hoover sits there, this gets worse and worse and worse. Hoover sits there and sits there. You see where this is going? Hoover just kind of sits there. A Republican sat there in the office. So this causes the public to lose trust in Hoover. He was elected very popularly, but now that the Depression's hit and he's just sitting there and doing nothing and nothing, and more and worse, people start realizing we need someone new in here that understands the issue and is not afraid to tackle it. And in 1933, in a landslide election, they basically say no to Hoover and elect Democratic candidate Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who I think we all know as FDR. Now, when Roosevelt takes office, the situation is probably at its most dire. There are 15 million people unemployed in the United States. This is 20% of the entire population of the nation. I don't even think unemployment has reached that level since. Early in 1933, just before Roosevelt takes office, all banks were basically being ordered to be shut down by the separate little individual states after another bank run happens, in order to try to protect them. And then the U.S. Treasury announces that they have run out of so much money they can't even afford to pay government and workers. Not fully. FDR, he came into the office with a sort of calm charisma. He didn't look like he was overly concerned. He didn't express fear. And at his inaugural address on March 4th, 1933, he very famously states that, and this is his own words, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. The American people, when they heard Roosevelt say this at his inaugural address, it really struck a chord with them because I'm sure we've all heard the stories. Roosevelt was handicapped. He, shortly after 1920, after World War I, where he had been Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and after a failed vice president campaign with James Cox to become with him being the vice presidential candidate for the presidency in 1920, he had gotten polio. Now, he did recover. However, Franklin Roosevelt did get his legs paralyzed. He was paralyzed from the waist down. He could not move his legs. And he was in a wheelchair, although he never liked to show himself in public in a wheelchair, which is why you'll very rarely find a photograph of him in a wheelchair. He took great lengths to hide his handicapness. He didn't like showing it. He didn't like it being published. But the American people, it really struck a chord with them that Roosevelt was telling them that we have nothing to fear but fear itself, because here everything's going to crap. The economy is going downhill. Everyone's losing their money. They're losing their jobs. They're losing their homes. And here comes this man in a wheelchair who's handicapped and should be more afraid than anybody else. And he's telling us we have nothing to fear. For some reason, it struck a chord with Americans, because here is this handicapped man, a wheelchair president, telling us we have nothing to fear. And he's calm as can be. And it starts to kind of appease the nation that something's going to be done. And Roosevelt immediately goes to work with this. Within his first 100 days in office, he immediately goes to work. Almost immediately after his inauguration in March, he announces a 4-day bank holiday that is going to be declared. And in this bank holiday, every bank across the nation would be shut down for 4 days. No matter if they were going out of business, no matter if they were still profiting or not, they would be shut down and closed for 4 days. During this 4-day period, his administration, and Congress would assess the situation. They would look at which banks were financially still sound, and whichever ones were still sound, they were going to give federal funding to in order to try to prop them up. So this is his effort to deal with the banks and the bank rushes. On March 12th, 1933, Roosevelt announces this bank holiday on the first of these radio broadcasts that he starts doing, and these become known as fireside chats, in which he would simply come on the radio, which was basically the hot technology to use to kind of communicate back then, and because there was really no television. And he goes ahead on the radio, and since everyone had a radio in their house, almost every home in America was able to hear the progress that his administration was making. He would do these simply to tell the American people, this is what we're doing to help you. I want you to know every detail of what we're attempting to do. And this really helped put people at ease because they start realizing, yeah, he's doing something because he's telling us. And this bank holiday, and on top of announcing the bank holiday, Roosevelt tries to appease the people, and he tries to tell them, he encourages them, you need to have faith in the bank system or it's not going to work. So when this bank holiday is over and we start propping up the banks, you need to put your money in the bank so they have money of which they can circulate a little bit. Put your money in the bank. You've got to have faith in the bank system. If you don't, this is never going to work. Putting your money under your mattress is not going to help you. So this starts restoring confidence in the government, not only due to the bank holiday, but the fact that Roosevelt is being upright truthful with the American people, and he's trying to keep them informed of what's going on. Yeah, I don't want to do that yet. So what happens is the bank crisis is solved rather rapidly with the bank holiday. Bank crisis averted. The bank runs are done. Roosevelt also passes legislation to try to help stabilize the agricultural and industrial production industry. He passes legislation to create jobs. He helps to try to stimulate the economy's recovery rather quickly. He does all this stuff within about a year. He starts doing this, and this becomes part of what he terms as, originally he called it a New Deal for the American people during his 1932 campaign. Now he terms it as the New Deal, which is probably what we've all learned in school at some point or heard from a family member. This becomes known as FDR's New Deal for the American people, the New Deal policy. So, and Roosevelt does create two new organizations to help with the American financial system and with the stock market to try to prevent this from ever happening again. First, he creates the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and this helps protect deposit accounts in banks, which is still in there today. I'm pretty sure if you go to any bank today and you look somewhere on their windows for the drive-through or something like that, you will see FDIC somewhere printed on a sign or on a banknote or something like that, even maybe on your check. You'll see it. And it is still in place today, and it's a vital part of the modern American financial system, as it helps to protect people's accounts in their banks. The second organization he creates is the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which basically regulates the stock market to this day in order to try to prevent the kind of abuses in investing that people were doing on the stock market prior to the stock market crash of 1929. This is basically to ensure that the stock market crash that we had in 1929 does not happen again, because the way that people were investing and betting and gambling on that thing, that's coming to an end because that's not going to be allowed anymore. That is not a safe practice. This basically safely regulates the stock market, and it's still in place today. So you also get a couple of organizations that start being formed out that Roosevelt creates to try to put the American people back to work. The first one you have is the Tennessee Valley Authority, or the TVA. And what this does is the TVA, or the Tennessee Valley Authority, it was based along the Tennessee River Valley and along the Tennessee River, which flows through Tennessee and Alabama, I think Mississippi, maybe a little bit of Georgia, and I think even Kentucky, if I'm not wrong. But anyway, all along the Tennessee River Valley, you had jobs that were being created by hiring millions and thousands of men to come out and build dams and hydroelectric plants along the river to try to control the flooding that sometimes happened on the river and to provide fresh, renewable electricity, while at the same time, it's employing hundreds of thousands and hundreds of millions because they got something to do that they're getting paid for by the government. It's putting people back to work. It's giving them a source of income. And that was the main idea with this. It wasn't necessarily to just build up a whole bunch of new stuff. Even though they were simple things, it was putting people back to work and giving them some kind of an income to live off of. The second two that he also creates are the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, and the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC. The Works Progress Administration and the CCC both kind of go out into almost every single town in America, including even my own right here in Ohio, has some parts that they built. And I can, in case people want to know what things were that they built, the CCC and the WPA, they built like smaller projects. They built roads, they built parks, they built pools, they built post offices, they did murals, they did almost any bridges. Bridges was another thing. They did almost any just tiny little road improvement things, little park recreation, almost anything like that. Like in my hometown, I have seen that there is a brick in our post office that shows that it was built during the Great Depression, and it was built by workers from the WPA. And then our city pool was also built by one of the two organizations as well. There is a stone over there that tells that it was built then. So they hit almost every little small community in America, and the big ones. They hit almost every town in America had a project done by either the WPA or the CCC. And this eventually employs almost 8.5 million people in the years between 1935 and 1940. Roosevelt, he also gives the U.S. its very first unemployment insurance. Prior to 1935, the United States was the only industrialized nation in the world without any sort of unemployment insurance or aid to the elderly. It was the only nation to lack this. And in 1935, Roosevelt corrects this oversight by introducing Social Security, which I'm pretty sure we all know what that is, or at least have heard of it. And Social Security is still very much here today. A lot of people are kind of over dependent on it as they get to that age where they can start withdrawing it out. And there's also fear that one day, very soon, it may also not be here much longer due to a continuous debate over funding for it. But what Social Security does is it's still active today, and I'm sure you know, if you all get issued a Social Security number when you're born, I hope to goodness you know yours, and I hope to goodness you don't share it with anybody, because that's not a good idea. But you're all getting that number. Usually, I think around age 65, you can typically legally withdraw from it, but I think there are some exceptions that you can withdraw from it at certain periods of time earlier on. Say, according to, at least from the bill from 1935, it was provided pensions to any of those who were suffering from unemployment, disabilities, or old age. So say you get a massive disability that you're paralyzed for the rest of your life and you're only like 35, technically you're supposed to be able to withdraw for Social Security. And technically, if you're unemployed, you're supposed to. I don't know if they do that or not, but I think they might. I'm not entirely certain, but as we all know, the old age. It basically provided some form of income to those who either couldn't find work or to those who couldn't even work at all because either A, they were getting older in age and they couldn't really do what they once could anymore, or they were now or maybe they had a disability and they couldn't work ever at all. Due to the measures that Roosevelt inputs with his New Deal, the GDP of the United States starts going back up and the economy improves. The GDP actually increases by 9% over the next 3 years. Between 1935 and 1938, the GDP of the United States went up by 9%. The economy is starting to recover. However, there is a recession that hits in 1937, and this starts reversing a lot of the benefits that had been gained during the earlier New Deal programs. Ultimately, the Depression continues until we get involved in World War II, and after December 7th of 1941, after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. And we might ask, well, how does World War II bring an end to the Great Depression? Although the New Deal did lessen the effects and it did help to improve the economy, alone it wouldn't have been able to fully do it. The World War II did it because at the outbreak of World War II, we start selling arms to a lot of the European nations. That's putting jobs in the factories to make these arms. And then when we actually get involved, now there's a bunch of demand for industrial jobs, building tanks, building ships, building weapons, building clothing, making clothing, every little thing that might be needed for the war. And then you also have how many jobs overseas in the military that they want soldiers. We need volunteers to go over here and fight. So although FDR's New Deal helps, the Depression doesn't really end until World War II breaks out, and that's only because World War II puts a massive increase in the demand for workers, for both in the military and at home. So World War II is kind of responsible for ending the Great Depression. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people that were alive during the Great Depression, they're dead now, at least ones that can really remember hardships. There are, of course, people that are left that might grew up during the era. They might remember a couple things or heard the stories that their parents told them, but it's rapidly kind of receding from the realm of human memory and becoming part of that. It's receding from the view of human memory, and it's becoming part of recorded history. Just like World War II is also receding from that horizon and reaching there as well. So the Great Depression, it is the worst financial depression I think the United States has ever had. We've not had something ever as bad as it since. Now, we've had our crises. We've had the 2008 recession. We've had a small kind of downturn this year, but nothing on the scale of the Great Depression that began in 1929. 1930 to 1933 were the worst years. Here we have a couple of photos we need to show and some info. First, I want to show here this picture of a bank being run by people as people rush to go get all their money out because they're fearing that they're going to lose it all, not realizing that by doing so they are going to lose it all. So this is a picture of a bank run. We got a picture of some homeless people. This was in, I think, New York City. Some homeless people that built up their own little shanty shacks in the alleys as they're trying to just make out some kind of a living, some kind of shelter for themselves, but they've lost their homes. See here. I don't know what that is. Here we have Herbert Hoover, the president who initially, he didn't plan for it. It wasn't exactly his fault. But the fact that he kind of just sat there in the office and did nothing kind of didn't help his reputation. And I've heard from some people that their family members in the past said, don't vote Republican because Hoover was a Republican. He was not good. This was Hoover. He's the guy that the Hoover Dam is named after, not the vacuum. He was our 31st president, from 1929 to 1933. Here you have a small little graph, really. This shows the employment rate. This is not the unemployment, this is the employment. How many people are employed in the United States in the years starting in 1920, and this goes to 1940. You can go by how many people are employed. You see a small little dip after World War I is over, here about 1921. And then it skyrockets right back up. It just keeps going up and up. And in 1929, you had around 31,000 people were employed across the nation. And then it gets worse. Then 1929, the stock market crashes. Things start going down. And by 1932, just a year before Roosevelt's elected, it's gone down. There's only roughly almost 24 million people employed. You have about 24 million people employed compared to the high in 1929 of around 31 million. You've gone down a ways. There's this massive drop, and this little trough is the Depression. And then it starts going up when the New Deal comes and up, and then we hit a small recession in 1937, and it goes down a little bit. And then it starts going back up again when World War II starts coming. So this is the employment rate. Then over here, we have a graph of the unemployment rate, how that skyrockets. And this is as a percent of the population, really, of the United States, starting in about 1910, ending in a little bit after 1960. See this big old line of the unemployment? It stays fairly steady. You remember, lower is better because this is unemployment. You don't want a bunch of people unemployed. So lower is better. And then in 1929, it starts going up massively until you have roughly over 20% of the population. I'd actually say you've probably got about 21 to 22% of the population unemployed. About right here at this peak. And then it starts going back down a little bit, then up and down. And then World War II happens, and it hits like an all-time low when World War II is going on. Then it goes up again, then it goes down, up, 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 up. But it never hits the height that the Great Depression brought to this nation. Never hits that again. Here we have a picture of Franklin Roosevelt signing the Social Security Act in 1935 that established Social Security. And in case you don't know who Franklin Roosevelt is, I don't really think I needed a separate photo because I'm pretty sure you've seen this guy. He was our 32nd president. He is the only president to serve more than 2 terms. He served 4. He died during his 4th term. And in case you wonder where you've seen him before, in case you don't know, and I know there's quite a few people that don't because they really just don't give a crap about their currency and they really don't pay attention to nothing. Some of them are quite dumb. If you don't know where you've seen him before, here's a hint, people. You've probably seen Franklin Roosevelt on your dimes. This is him on the dime. 10 cents. This is actually a fresh dime for this year. I know we're in a coin shortage, but yet they commit me a new dime. And then here is a picture of an advertisement poster for the CCC, or the Civilian Conservation Corps, encouraging that people to join up and get employed, get a job. We're offering it. So that concludes here for the Great Depression. I'm not exactly the biggest financial expert, so I couldn't explain in depth as much as I would have wanted to. But ultimately, it was caused by the stock market, by reckless people going on the stock market and continuously bidding and investing and thinking that the stocks are going to constantly and continuously go up and never go down. That is what mainly caused this. And may I also add, in my opinion, the stock market I don't trust because it sent the whole country into the worst depression it ever had. And on top of that, in a very small way, I will make this connection to another previous video that we did. Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany in 1933, the same year that Roosevelt takes office. Germany, as we mentioned, during the 1920s, it was already experiencing financial hardship. Well, the Depression hits Germany too, and what was already bad in Germany, it gets even worse. To the point that the people in Germany become so desperate for a way out of the financial situation crisis, they're willing to take almost any possibility of any voice of anyone that says that they can solve the problem. And this turns them desperate enough to turn to Hitler and his view. And Hitler did get his country out of the Great Depression, but where Roosevelt had civilian jobs, Hitler had mostly military jobs, as in secretly rearming Germany with tanks and weapons. He did get his country out of it, but the way that he did it was much different than Roosevelt. Hitler was preparing for war from the onset, but I would like to state that had the Great Depression not have happened, it's very likely Hitler would not have come to power in Germany because the people wouldn't have been that desperate to embrace his view. And in a small way, since the stock market kind of caused the whole mess, in a very small way, and I want you to think about this, the stock market is somewhat responsible for Nazi Germany. They are somewhat responsible for the rise of Hitler. They're somewhat responsible for the Holocaust. I just want you to ponder that in your mind. They're not directly, but indirectly they sort of are. Part of the reason I don't trust it. The other reason is I think it's a fool's errand, but that's my opinion. So anyway, that is the Great Depression. I just wanted to cover that topic. Next week we will have, there will be one video, there may be two, might be two, I'm not sure, I'm not entirely certain yet. We are going to be doing, I know the one video, I will say what it is, we're going to be doing the one on the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which is approaching the 75th anniversary of that and Japan's surrender, so we will be doing that. I want to make this announcement now, I guess, is next week will probably be my last normal week for about 2 weeks because of the fact that the week after that, I'm actually going on a vacation trip here in my state, not out of state like a person that doesn't know how to think. I'm not leaving my own state. I got enough conscience and intelligence to say the smart decision and stay home in my own state at least. So I'm not going that far from my house. I'm going about not a mile, but about an hour away. But anyway, I will not be posting a video that week unless I post one when I come back that weekend. So I will have to decide what's going to happen there, and I'll make an announcement next week as to what that's going to be. But I just want to get ahead of that now. So that's why I'm going to do the Hiroshima and Nagasaki video early, because I will not exactly be home on the dates that actually would have happened, and I would still like to have that video up by that time. So that will be coming up. So if any of these videos are becoming very likable to you, or if you're liking any of them, be sure to subscribe. Feel free to put any comment in the comment section below on any of the videos. Also feel free, as always, to give me any kind of ideas that you may want me to talk about on a history topic. Feel free to get them to me. So that, I think, about covers it for this video. So hopefully everyone has a good continued rest of their week, and we will see you all back here with the next video on Hiroshima and Nagasaki next week. So have a good week, and God bless you all through this current day and age as we kind of go through the coronavirus crisis. So stay safe, stay healthy. God bless you.